The wine glass in Marcus's hand caught the light as he leaned back and said, loud enough for the whole table to hear, that his sister Mia still lived like a college student. The laughter that followed was quick, easy, and cruel in the way only family laughter can be. Mia's fork paused halfway to her mouth. She set it down slowly and smiled, but the smile did not reach her eyes. Daniel sat at the head of the table, his fiancée Claire beside him, and for a moment he almost missed it. He was too busy watching his mother refill her glass, too busy thinking about the ring on Claire's finger and how good it felt to finally have his whole family in one room again. It was supposed to be a night of celebration. His engagement dinner. The kind of night people remembered for years. He did not yet know that by the end of it, everyone at that table would remember it for a completely different reason. 29 years old, Marcus continued, swirling his wine, and she's still working at that little bookstore downtown, ringing up used paperbacks for minimum wage. He shook his head like it pained him personally. I just worry about her, that's all. I make enough to live, Mia said quietly. Her voice was calm, almost gentle, the voice of someone who had said similar words many times before and had stopped expecting anyone to listen. Living isn't the same as building something, their father added, not unkindly, but with the tone of a man repeating an old argument he believed he had already won. Marcus has his firm, even your brother's wife has her clinic. What do you have, sweetheart? A part-time job in a studio apartment. Claire glanced sideways at Daniel, waiting for him to say something. He didn't. He was refilling his own glass, laughing softly at something his mother had said, completely unaware that his sister's shoulders had gone stiff, that her hands had folded tightly in her lap. Mia had grown used to this. She had spent years learning how to sit through dinners like this one, how to let the comments slide off her like rain off a window. She had told herself long ago that it was easier to stay quiet than to explain herself to people who had already decided who she was. Tonight, though, something felt different. Tonight, her phone was sitting face down beside her plate, and she kept glancing at it every few minutes, waiting. She's an artist, their mother said, using the word the way someone might use a joke they had told too many times. Remember when she wanted to be a writer, or was it a painter? I can't even keep track anymore. I still write, Mia said. I just don't talk about it at dinner. Because there's nothing to talk about, Marcus said, and this time his voice had an edge to it, sharper than before. Look, I love you, sis, but somebody has to be honest. You're almost 30. No boyfriend, no house, no real career. Dad and Mom worry, I worry, we all worry. The table went quiet for a beat too long. Claire shifted in her seat, uncomfortable in a way she hadn't expected to be on what was supposed to be her happiest night. She barely knew this family. She had met Mia only twice before, both times briefly, both times struck by how gentle and thoughtful she seemed, how different from the loud confidence of her brother. Watching her sit there now, absorbing insult after insult with a calm expression, made something twist uneasily in Claire's chest. Maybe we should talk about something else, Claire offered carefully. No, it's fine, Mia said and smiled at her, a real smile this time, small but warm. They mean well, mostly. Daniel finally seemed to notice the tension settling over the table like a fog. He looked at his sister, really looked at her, and felt a flicker of guilt he couldn't quite explain. He opened his mouth to change the subject, to steer the conversation somewhere safer, but his mother spoke first. I just think, she said, dabbing her napkin at the corner of her mouth, that at some point a person has to grow up. Marcus did. Even Daniel did once he met Claire. When is it going to be your turn, Mia? Mia's jaw tightened, just slightly. It was the first real crack in her composure all evening, small enough that most people would have missed it. Claire didn't. Neither did Daniel, though he mistook it for embarrassment rather than the tightly controlled anger it actually was. I have a job I like, Mia said. I have people I care about. I have a life. It might not look like yours, but it's mine. A job you like, Marcus repeated, rolling the words around like they tasted strange. That's cute, but liking something doesn't pay for retirement, Mia. It doesn't buy a house. It doesn't. His sentence was cut off by the buzz of Mia's phone against the table. She glanced down at the screen, and something shifted in her face. It was subtle, but Claire caught it immediately. A flicker of surprise, maybe even excitement, quickly smoothed over. "Sorry," Mia murmured, sliding the phone into her lap without answering it. "I'll deal with it later." "Probably the bookstore," Marcus said with a smirk, glancing around the table for agreement. "Someone's overdue book fine, maybe." A few chuckles rippled around the table. Mia said nothing. She simply reached for her water glass and took a slow sip, her eyes fixed somewhere in the middle distance, as though she were doing calculations in her head that no one else could see. Daniel felt the first real stirring of discomfort settle into his stomach. He had grown up with these dinners, had spent his whole childhood watching Marcus get praised while Mia got quietly dismissed, and he had always told himself it was just how their family worked. Marcus was loud and confident, so he got attention. Mia was quiet and private, so she got overlooked. It had never seemed unfair to him before, not really, not in any way he had ever stopped to examine closely. But something about watching Claire's face right now, the barely hidden discomfort in her eyes as she watched his family pick apart his sister piece by piece, made him see it differently for the first time. He thought about all the times over the years he had let a comment slide, all the times he had laughed along instead of stepping in, and the guilt in his stomach grew heavier. "Mia," he said finally, trying for a lighter tone, "you don't have to explain yourself to anyone tonight. This is supposed to be a happy night." "It is a happy night," Mia said, looking at him with something that might have been gratitude or might have been simple exhaustion. "I'm happy for you and Claire, truly." "Then smile more," their mother said, missing the moment entirely. "You always look so serious." Mia's phone buzzed again. This time she didn't even glance at it, though her fingers tightened slightly around the stem of her wine glass. Claire noticed the movement and felt a strange, unplaceable instinct settle over her. The sense that there was something happening beneath the surface of this dinner that none of them could see yet, something waiting to break through. "Can I ask you something?" Claire said suddenly, turning toward Mia, ignoring the surprised look Daniel gave her. "What do you actually do at the bookstore? Like, what's a normal day for you?" It was a small question, an innocent one, but the table seemed to pause around it. Marcus rolled his eyes faintly. Their father reached for the bread basket, clearly uninterested in the answer. But Mia looked at Claire for a long moment, as though genuinely surprised anyone had asked. "I sort books," Mia said carefully. "I help people find what they're looking for. Sometimes rare ones, old ones, it's more interesting than it sounds." "Rare books," Marcus said, unable to resist. "Right, very glamorous." Claire ignored him, keeping her eyes on Mia. "That sounds interesting to me." For the briefest moment, something flickered across Mia's face, gratitude, maybe surprise, maybe the smallest flash of the truth she had been carrying quietly for years, tucked away where no one at this table had ever thought to look for it. Then it was gone, replaced by her usual careful calm. "Thank you," Mia said softly. "Not everyone thinks so." The dinner continued. Plates were cleared. Wine was poured again. The comments about Mia's life did not stop entirely, they simply softened, the way a storm softens before it gathers strength again. Daniel watched his sister sit quietly at the far end of the table, watched her phone buzz 2 more times without her checking it, watched her hands remain perfectly steady despite everything being said around her. He did not know, not yet, that the calm on her face was not resignation. It was patience. He did not know that the calls she was ignoring were not from the bookstore at all, but from a man in another city who was waiting, breathlessly, for her to confirm the details of a deal that would change everything anyone at this table believed about her. He only knew that something about tonight felt different, that his sister seemed to be holding something behind her eyes, something enormous and carefully hidden, something that had nothing to do with the small, dismissed version of her life that his family kept insisting was the whole truth. The dinner moved on toward dessert, the conversation drifting toward other things, but the tension never fully left the room. It sat there quietly, waiting, the way tension always does before it finally breaks. Claire found herself watching Mia more closely as the plates were cleared, noticing small things she hadn't noticed before. The way Mia's posture never truly slumped, even under the weight of every jab thrown her way. The way she chose her words carefully, never defensive, never pleading for approval. There was a quiet strength in her that did not match the picture the rest of the family kept painting, and Claire could not shake the feeling that she was witnessing only a fraction of who this woman really was. At one point, their mother stood to bring out the dessert, and the table fell into a rare lull. Mia used the moment to finally glance at her phone, tilting the screen away from prying eyes. Whatever she read there made her breath catch, just slightly, a small intake of air that she quickly disguised as a sip of water. Claire caught it anyway. She always noticed the details other people missed, a habit from years of paying attention to things that mattered. "Everything okay?" Claire asked quietly, leaning closer so only Mia could hear. Mia looked up startled, then offered a small, genuine smile. "Everything's about to be very okay," she said. "I just need to get through dessert first." Before Claire could ask what she meant, their mother returned with a tray of pastries, and the conversation swept forward again, carrying the moment away with it. But Claire held onto those words. She had a feeling, one she could not explain, that something important was coming, something the rest of the table was not prepared for. Outside, the evening had settled into full darkness, the dining room glowing warm and golden against the night. From the outside, anyone looking in would have seen a beautiful family gathered around a beautiful table, celebrating a happy occasion. They would not have seen the quiet storm building at the far end of that table, patient and steady, waiting only for the right moment to finally speak. Dessert arrived in the form of a chocolate torte their mother had ordered from a bakery downtown, and for a few minutes the table settled into something resembling peace. Forks clinked against plates. Marcus complimented the frosting. Their father asked Claire about wedding plans, and Claire answered politely, though her attention kept drifting back to Mia, who ate slowly, deliberately, her eyes occasionally flicking toward the phone resting beside her plate. It was Marcus who broke the peace first, as he so often did. He set down his fork, wiped his mouth, and turned toward his sister with the particular smile he wore when he was about to say something he considered clever. "You know," he said, "I ran into Kevin Marsh last week. Remember him? He asked about you." Mia's expression flickered just for a moment. "I remember him. He asked if you two ever got back together." Marcus laughed, shaking his head. "I told him no way, said you were still figuring things out." He seemed relieved, honestly. The comment landed with a quiet cruelty that made Claire's stomach tighten. She glanced at Daniel, hoping he would say something, anything, but he was staring down at his plate, his jaw tight, clearly uncomfortable but unwilling to interrupt his older brother in front of the whole family. It was a pattern Claire was beginning to recognize. The way Daniel seemed to shrink slightly whenever Marcus took center stage, as though old habits from childhood had never fully faded. "That was years ago," Mia said evenly. "I'm not sure why it matters now." "It matters because you're still alone," their mother said, not looking up from her dessert, as though she were commenting on the weather rather than her daughter's entire personal life. "I just want to see you happy, sweetheart. Settled." "Is that so wrong?" "I am happy," Mia said, and for the first time that evening there was a slight edge beneath her calm tone, something sharper than before. "I keep telling you that, but nobody seems to believe me." "How could you be happy?" Marcus pressed, leaning forward now, warming to the subject the way he always did when he sensed an opening. "You live in a tiny apartment. You work a job that pays almost nothing. You haven't dated anyone seriously in years. I'm not trying to be mean, Mia, I'm just being real with you. Someone has to be." Claire felt her own temper flare, quick and hot, surprising her with its intensity. She barely knew this family, had no real standing to intervene, and yet watching this woman absorb blow after blow with such steady grace made something protective rise up in her chest. "I don't think that's fair," Claire said quietly, and the table turned toward her, startled by the interruption. "You don't know what her life is actually like. None of you have asked." Silence settled over the table, heavy and awkward. Marcus blinked, clearly not expecting pushback from someone he barely knew. Their father cleared his throat, uncomfortable. Their mother's mouth tightened into a thin line. "We're just having an honest conversation," Marcus said, recovering quickly, his tone turning defensive. This is a family matter. She's about to be family, Daniel said suddenly, finding his voice at last, though it came out quieter than he intended. And she's right, we don't actually know what Mia's life is like, we just assume. Mia looked at her brother with something unreadable in her expression, gratitude tangled with old, tired disappointment, as though she had waited years to hear him say something like that, and could not quite believe it had finally happened, even now, even this small. It's fine, Mia said again, the phrase she had repeated all evening like a shield. Really, I'm used to it. That's the problem, Claire said before she could stop herself. You shouldn't have to be used to it. Marcus set down his wine glass with a sharp clink against the table. Look, I love my sister. Everyone here loves Mia, but love means being honest even when it's uncomfortable. She's almost 30 years old with nothing to show for it. No savings, no career, no relationship. At some point, someone has to say it out loud instead of pretending everything's fine. You don't know anything about my savings, Mia said quietly. I know you work at a bookstore, Marcus shot back. I know your rent is probably less than my car payment. I'm not trying to be cruel, Mia, I'm trying to help you see reality. The words hung in the air, sharp and heavy, and for a moment Mia said nothing at all. She simply stared at her brother, her expression unreadable, her fingers curling slightly around the edge of the table. Claire held her breath, sensing that something had shifted, that the careful calm Mia had maintained all evening was finally beginning to strain. You have no idea what my reality is, Mia said finally, her voice low and steady. None of you do. Then enlighten us, their father said, not unkindly, but with the tired impatience of a man who had heard this conversation too many times before and expected no different outcome now. Mia opened her mouth, then closed it again, glancing down at the phone beside her plate. Whatever battle was happening behind her eyes, she seemed to decide against it, at least for now. She shook her head slightly and reached for her water glass instead. Not tonight, she said quietly. This is Daniel's night. I'm not going to make it about me. There she goes again, Marcus said, throwing up his hands as though he had won some argument, always avoiding, always deflecting. It's like talking to a wall. Claire felt her jaw tighten, watching Mia absorb yet another insult without flinching, watching the rest of the family nod along as though Marcus had simply spoken an obvious truth. She thought about her own family, imperfect in their own ways, but nothing like this, nothing so casually, consistently cruel toward one of their own. Can we talk about literally anything else? Daniel asked, his voice strained now, clearly uncomfortable with how far the evening had drifted from the celebration he had planned. This is supposed to be a happy night. It is happy, their mother said, oblivious as ever to the tension thick in the air. We're just talking, that's what families do. Mia's phone buzzed again, insistent this time, 3 quick pulses against the tablecloth. She glanced down at it, and whatever she saw made her sit up slightly straighter, her expression shifting into something Claire couldn't quite place, focus, maybe, or resolve. I need to take this, Mia said, rising from her chair. Excuse me for a moment. The bookstore again, Marcus called after her, unable to resist one final jab as she walked away. Big emergency with the overdue fines. Mia didn't answer. She simply walked toward the hallway, phone pressed to her ear, her voice dropping low enough that no one at the table could make out her words. But Claire watched her go, watched the way her posture changed the moment she thought no one was looking, shoulders squaring, chin lifting, the tired resignation of the dinner table replaced by something that looked almost like command. She's always been dramatic, their mother said with a sigh, reaching for her wine. Ever since she was little, everything's a crisis with her. I don't think that's dramatic, Claire said quietly. I think that's someone trying to have a private conversation. The table fell into an uneasy silence after that, broken only by the soft clinking of dessert forks and the low hum of Mia's voice drifting in from the hallway, too quiet to understand but urgent enough to notice. Daniel found himself straining to listen, curiosity mixing with the guilt still sitting heavy in his stomach. He thought about all the years he had spent taking his family's version of Mia at face value, the quiet, unremarkable sister who never quite lived up to expectations. And he wondered, for the first time in his life, whether that version had ever been true at all, or whether it was simply the story that was easiest for all of them to believe. Minutes passed. The conversation at the table limped forward, awkward and thin, everyone aware that something had shifted but unwilling to name it directly. Marcus tried to steer things back toward safer topics, asking Daniel about the wedding venue, but his voice lacked its usual confidence, as though even he sensed the ground had grown unsteady beneath him. When Mia finally returned to the table, her expression had changed entirely. The careful, patient calm was still there, but underneath it now was something new, a quiet, unshakable certainty, like a person who had just been handed proof of something they always knew but had never been able to say out loud. She sat down slowly, folding her hands in front of her, and looked around the table at each of them in turn, her mother, her father, her brother, and finally Daniel and Claire, before she spoke. "I think we need to have a real conversation," Mia said quietly. "Not tonight maybe, but soon. There are things about my life that none of you know, and I think it's time you did." The table went silent again, but this silence felt different from before. It felt like the calm before something enormous, the kind of stillness that settles over a room right before everything changes. "A real conversation about what?" their mother asked, setting down her wine glass with a small, uncertain laugh. "Mia, you're scaring me a little." "I don't mean to scare you," Mia said. "I just mean that I've let all of you believe something about me for a long time, and I think it's time to stop." Marcus leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, his earlier confidence replaced by something more guarded. "What is that supposed to mean?" "It means exactly what I said," Mia replied, her voice steady despite the way her fingers pressed slightly into the tablecloth. "There are parts of my life I haven't shared with any of you, not because I was hiding something wrong, because every time I tried I was interrupted or dismissed or laughed at before I could even finish a sentence." Their father shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "That's not fair, Mia. We've always supported you." "Have you?" Mia asked, and though her voice remained calm, there was a new firmness in it that none of them had heard before. "Tonight alone, in front of Daniel's fiancée, you've called me directionless, unsettled, a disappointment without ever saying the word out loud, though we all know that's what you meant." Claire watched the color drain slightly from their mother's face, watched Marcus's jaw tighten, watched Daniel's hand find Claire's beneath the table, gripping it as though bracing himself for whatever was coming next. "I'm not trying to ruin tonight," Mia continued, glancing toward her brother and softening slightly. "This is your night, Daniel, and I mean that. I'm genuinely happy for you and Claire. But I think it's time this family saw me clearly, instead of the version of me that's easiest to laugh about at dinner." "Nobody's laughing at you," Marcus said, though his voice lacked its usual conviction. "You've been laughing at me all night," Mia said simply, without anger, only quiet fact. "I've let it happen for years because it felt easier than explaining myself to people who had already made up their minds. But that call I just took changes things. It changes a lot of things, actually. And I think after tonight, none of you are going to see me the same way again." The table sat in stunned silence, plates forgotten, wine glasses untouched, every eye fixed on the quiet woman at the end of the table who suddenly did not seem quite so easy to dismiss anymore. Claire felt a small thrill of anticipation mixed with nerves, sensing that whatever truth Mia had been carrying was finally about to surface, and that once it did, this family would never sit around this table in quite the same way again. Daniel looked at his sister, really looked at her, searching her face for some clue as to what she meant. For the first time all evening, he saw something there he had never noticed before, not the quiet resignation he had grown used to, but a steady, patient strength that had clearly been building for a very long time, waiting for exactly this moment to reveal itself. "What is it, Mia?" he asked softly. "What haven't you told us?" Mia looked at him, then at the rest of the table, and took a slow breath, The kind of breath a person takes before stepping off solid ground into something entirely new. "Not yet," she said. "Let's finish dessert first. But I promise you, by the end of tonight, you'll understand exactly why I've been able to sit through everything you've said to me without falling apart." She picked her fork back up, calm and composed, and resumed eating as though she hadn't just upended the entire evening with a handful of quiet sentences. The rest of the table exchanged uneasy glances, no one quite sure what to say, the comfortable cruelty of earlier suddenly replaced by a cautious, uncertain silence that stretched on for the remainder of dessert, thick with unanswered questions and the growing sense that something significant was about to be revealed. Claire studied Mia's face across the table, searching for any hint of what was coming, but found only calm patience there, the look of someone who had waited a long time for this exact moment and intended to enjoy every second of it. Whatever truth was about to surface, Claire understood now that it was not going to be small, and she found herself both nervous and strangely excited to witness it unfold. The dessert plates were cleared away by a hired server, and for a while the table sat in a strange, suspended quiet, the kind that follows a storm warning before the storm itself arrives. Marcus kept glancing toward his sister, clearly unsettled by her sudden shift in demeanor, though he tried to mask it behind idle small talk about his firm's latest case. Their mother busied herself refilling water glasses that didn't need refilling. Their father cleared his throat more than once, as though preparing to say something, then thinking better of it each time. Claire noticed all of it, the small nervous movements, the avoided eye contact, and understood that whatever confidence this family projected at the start of the evening had been built on a version of Mia none of them had ever bothered to question. Now that version was cracking, and none of them quite knew how to handle the sight of it. "So," Marcus said finally, unable to bear the silence any longer, "are you going to tell us what that was about, or are we supposed to just sit here guessing?" Mia set down her water glass and looked at her brother steadily. "I've been thinking about how to say this for years, actually. I just never found the right moment. I suppose there's no such thing as a perfect moment for something like this, so I might as well use tonight." "Mia," their mother said, her voice softer now, tinged with something that might have been worry, "you're not in trouble, are you? Is this about money? Do you need help?" "No," Mia said, and the corner of her mouth lifted slightly, the first real amusement she had shown all evening. "It's not about needing help. It's about something I've been building quietly for the last 3 years, something I never told any of you because I knew exactly how you would react." "Building what?" their father asked, leaning forward now, his earlier impatience replaced by genuine curiosity. Mia took a slow breath. "Do you remember when I left my job at the publishing house? Everyone assumed I quit because I couldn't handle the pressure. That's the story that got repeated at every family dinner for the next year, but that's not what happened." Marcus frowned. "What did happen then?" "I left because I found something I was better at," Mia said. "Something that used my background in literature and my eye for detail in a way that publishing never did. I started small, helping a private collector track down a first edition he'd been searching for. It took me 2 months, but I found it. He paid me more for that one job than I made in 3 months at the bookstore." The table had gone completely still, every fork and glass forgotten, every eye fixed on Mia as she spoke. After that, word spread quietly through certain circles: collectors, universities, small museums, people who needed someone who understood rare books, who could track down manuscripts and first editions and forgotten archives, who could authenticate what was real and what wasn't. I started taking on more clients. I kept the bookstore job because I genuinely love it, and because it gave me cover. Nobody expects the quiet woman shelving paperbacks to be quietly running acquisitions for private collectors around the world. "Around the world," Claire repeated, unable to keep the astonishment out of her voice. Mia nodded. "Last year alone, I helped source 3 manuscripts for a university archive in another country. I found a first edition that a collector had been searching for over a decade. I built relationships with dealers and auction houses that most people don't even know exist. It's slow work. It's careful work. but it pays extraordinarily well when you know what you're doing. Marcus let out a short, disbelieving laugh, though it carried none of his earlier confidence. You're telling us you've been secretly running some kind of book business this whole time, while we've been sitting here thinking you were struggling. I've been letting you think that, Mia said simply. Because every time I tried to explain what I actually did, I got interrupted, or mocked, or told it wasn't a real career. So eventually I stopped trying. It was easier to let you believe the smaller story. Their mother pressed a hand to her chest, looking genuinely stricken. Mia, why would you keep something like that from us? We're your family. Because family is supposed to make you feel safe enough to share things, Mia said, her voice gentle but firm. And for a long time this family hasn't felt like that to me. I got tired of defending myself. So I stopped, and I let the story you already believed stand because it was simpler than fighting. Daniel felt something heavy settle in his chest, guilt mixed with a strange, aching pride. He thought about every family dinner over the past few years, every joke made at his sister's expense, every eye roll, every dismissive comment, and understood now that his sister had absorbed every bit of it while quietly building something extraordinary in the background alone, without a single person at this table knowing or caring enough to ask. That phone call earlier, Claire said slowly, piecing it together. That was about this, wasn't it? Your business. Mia nodded. That was my main contact confirming the final details of a deal I've been working on for the past several months. A private collection, very significant, very rare. It's the biggest job I've handled so far. She paused, glancing around the table. It's worth more than most people make in several years combined. The silence that followed was so complete that Claire could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen down the hall. Marcus's mouth opened, then closed, as though he could not find any words sharp enough to counter what he had just heard. Their father sat back in his chair, blinking slowly, clearly recalculating everything he thought he understood about his daughter. Why tonight? Their mother finally asked, her voice small. Why tell us now of all nights? Because I watched Claire defend me tonight, Mia said, glancing warmly at her soon-to-be sister-in-law. A woman who barely knows me, standing up for me at a table full of people who are supposed to love me unconditionally. That made me realize how long I'd been letting all of you get away with treating me like an afterthought. I decided I was done being quiet about it. Claire felt a rush of unexpected emotion at those words, humbled and moved that something so small, standing up during dinner, had meant so much to someone she had only just started to know. Marcus finally found his voice again, though it came out quieter than before, stripped of its earlier arrogance. I didn't know, he said. I really didn't know, Mia, if I had. You still would have made those jokes, Mia said, not unkindly, but with a directness that silenced him completely. Because it was never really about what I actually did with my life. It was about the story you'd already decided to believe. The quiet, unremarkable sister who never quite measured up. It was easier to laugh at that story than to ask real questions. Their father rubbed a hand across his face, looking older suddenly, worn down by the weight of what he was hearing. I always thought I was pushing you because I cared, because I wanted better for you. You can care about someone and still fail to actually see them, Mia said gently. That's what happened tonight, and honestly, for years before tonight too. Daniel reached across the table, unable to stay silent any longer, and took his sister's hand. I'm sorry, he said, his voice thick. I should have said something, tonight and every other time before tonight. I let it happen because it was easier than standing up to Marcus, and that's on me. Mia squeezed his hand, her eyes bright with emotion she had clearly been holding back all evening. Thank you for saying that. Marcus looked between his siblings, something shifting uncomfortably behind his eyes, the slow, unwelcome realization that the version of his sister he had mocked for years was far more capable, far more successful, and far more resilient than he had ever imagined. It was not a comfortable thing to sit with, watching years of casual cruelty reframed so suddenly and so completely. I owe you an apology, Marcus said finally, the words clearly difficult for him. A real one, Not tonight, maybe, when everyone's had time to think. But I owe you one. I'd like that, Mia said simply, when you're ready. Their mother reached across the table, resting a hand gently over Mia's. I'm proud of you, she said quietly, even though I clearly had no idea what I was supposed to be proud of. I want you to tell us everything, all of it, starting now if you're willing. Mia looked around the table at each of them, at the shifting, humbled faces of the family who had spent years underestimating her, and felt something loosen in her chest that had been tight for a very long time. All right, she said softly, I'll tell you everything. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, the table listened, truly listened, as Mia began to speak. She began 3 years earlier, on a rainy afternoon when she had been sorting through a donated box of old books at the store. Buried beneath water-damaged paperbacks and cracked spines, she found a slim volume that made her pulse quicken the moment she opened its cover. The typeface was wrong for its supposed printing date. The binding technique matched an era decades earlier than the book claimed. She spent that entire evening researching, cross-referencing, and by midnight she was certain she was holding something far more valuable than a donation box discard. I could have just sold it quietly and made a small profit, Mia said, but instead I spent 3 weeks tracking down a specialist who could properly authenticate it. It turned out to be a genuine early printing that collectors had been searching for. I sold it through a small auction house to a private buyer, and the amount I made from that single book was more than I earned in 6 months at the bookstore. Claire leaned forward, fascinated despite the strangeness of hearing this story unfold in the middle of an engagement dinner. What did you do with the money? I reinvested it, Mia said. I used it to build relationships with dealers, to travel to a few small auctions, to learn everything I could about a world most people never think about. Rare books, forgotten manuscripts, private letters from historical figures that end up forgotten in attics and estate sales. There's an entire quiet industry built around finding these things and connecting them with the people who understand their value. And nobody at the bookstore knew, their father asked. A few people suspected I had something going on the side, Mia admitted, but I never advertised it. I liked keeping the two parts of my life separate. The bookstore gave me routine, community, a reason to get up every morning surrounded by the thing I love most. The acquisitions work gave me everything else, the challenge, the travel, the financial freedom. I never needed anyone's permission for either one. Marcus shook his head slowly, still visibly struggling to reconcile this version of his sister with the one he had spent years dismissing. The apartment, he said suddenly. You could afford so much more than that apartment. Why stay somewhere so small? Because I like it there, Mia said simply. It's close to the bookstore, it's quiet. I don't need a bigger space to prove anything to anyone. I've always found it strange that people assume success has to look a certain way, has to come with a certain kind of house or car or lifestyle. I built exactly the life I wanted. It just didn't look like what this family expected success to look like, so nobody thought to ask. Their mother's eyes were glistening now, a mixture of guilt and something like awe. All this time, she said quietly, we thought we were watching you struggle. And really we were watching you build something extraordinary, alone, without any of us noticing or supporting you. I made my peace with that a long time ago, Mia said, though her voice softened at her mother's words. I stopped needing this family's approval to feel like what I was doing mattered. That's actually what let me keep going, honestly. If I had waited for all of you to believe in me, I never would have started. Daniel felt the weight of that statement settle over him fully now, understanding for the first time just how alone his sister must have felt, building something remarkable in complete silence, because the people who should have been her biggest supporters had spent years treating her potential as a joke. Tell us about the collection, Claire said gently. The one from the phone call tonight. What made it so significant? Mia's expression shifted, a flicker of genuine excitement breaking through her careful composure for the first time all evening. It belonged to a private family for nearly a century, she said. A collection of early manuscripts and letters that historians have been trying to access for years. The family finally decided to sell, quietly, through a small circle of trusted dealers. I've been working for 8 months to secure the deal on behalf of a university archive that wants to preserve the collection properly and make it available to researchers. 8 months, their father repeated, clearly impressed despite himself. Deals like this move slowly, Mia said. There's verification, negotiation, legal transfers, provenance research to make sure everything is exactly what it claims to be. Tonight's call confirmed that the final paperwork is complete. The collection is secured. It's the largest deal I've ever closed, and it's going to be preserved somewhere it can actually be studied and appreciated, instead of sitting locked away in someone's private storage. The pride in her voice was unmistakable now, quiet but unwavering, and Claire found herself smiling, moved by the sight of Mia finally allowing herself to be proud out loud, in front of the very people who had spent years teaching her to hide that pride away. "I wish you had told us sooner," their mother said softly. "I wish we had asked the right questions instead of assuming we already knew the answers." "I wish that too," Mia admitted. "But I understand why it happened the way it did. It's easier to see the person right in front of you as the same person they've always been, especially when that person doesn't correct you. I let this go on for a long time because speaking up felt exhausting and quiet was simpler." Marcus, still visibly shaken, reached for his water glass with an unsteady hand. "I feel like an idiot," he said quietly. "All those jokes tonight, all those years of jokes. And this whole time you were out there doing something incredible, and I never once thought to ask a real question." "You're not an idiot," Mia said, though her tone carried no particular warmth toward him yet only honesty. "You just made assumptions the same way this whole family did. I don't expect an apology to erase years of it, but I appreciate you saying it." The table sat together in a strange, new kind of quiet, not the tense, brittle silence from earlier in the evening, but something gentler, more reflective, as though every person at that table were quietly rearranging the picture they had carried of Mia for years, piece by piece, into something far more complete and far more impressive than they had ever imagined. Claire watched it happen, watched a family slowly reckon with how wrong they had been, and felt a quiet certainty settle over her that whatever came next for this family, tonight would mark the moment everything between them began to change. The rest of the dinner unfolded in a way none of them could have predicted an hour earlier. The hired server returned to clear the last of the dessert plates, glancing curiously at the strange, charged atmosphere hanging over the table, though no one offered any explanation. Marcus sat unusually quiet, turning his wine glass slowly between his fingers, lost in thoughts he clearly did not know how to voice. Their father kept glancing at Mia as though seeing her for the first time, studying her face the way a person studies a photograph they have just learned was taken somewhere entirely different than they assumed. "Can I ask something?" their father said finally, breaking the long stretch of quiet. "The university archive, which one?" Mia named it, and their father's eyebrows lifted in surprise. He had, it turned out, attended a lecture there years earlier, long before any of them could have imagined his daughter would one day be responsible for securing one of its most significant acquisitions. "I had no idea that kind of work even existed," he admitted. "Private acquisitions, rare manuscripts. I thought that sort of thing was handled entirely by museums and universities themselves." "Most people think that," Mia said. "That's part of why it works so well as something I could build quietly. Nobody expects an independent contractor working out of a small apartment to be the person connecting major institutions with private sellers. I like operating in that gap. It suits how I work best, careful, patient, mostly unnoticed until the deal is done." "Mostly unnoticed," Marcus repeated softly, the words clearly landing somewhere uncomfortable. "That's basically been the story of your whole life around this family, hasn't it? Unnoticed." Mia looked at him for a long moment before answering. "I used to think that was just who I was, quiet, overlooked. It took me a long time to realize that being underestimated wasn't a flaw in me. It was a mistake other people kept making." The words settled heavily over the table, and Claire watched Marcus flinch almost imperceptibly, absorbing the weight of them. For all his earlier bravado, he looked smaller now, stripped of the easy confidence that had carried him through dinner up until this point, forced to sit with the discomfort of having spent years underestimating his own sister without ever once questioning whether he might be wrong. "I think," their mother said slowly, "we all owe you more than an apology, Mia. We owe you actual attention, real questions, not assumptions dressed up as concern." "I'd like that," Mia said again, softer this time. "I've missed having real conversations with this family. I stopped expecting them a long time ago, but I never stopped wanting them." Daniel reached over and squeezed his sister's shoulder, unable to find words adequate to the moment, though the gesture seemed to say enough. Claire watched the exchange and felt something warm settle in her chest, a quiet hope that whatever cracks had existed in this family for years might finally begin slowly to mend. "So what happens now?" Marcus asked, glancing at his sister. "With the collection, I mean, what's next for you?" "The university will announce the acquisition publicly in a few weeks," Mia said. "There's a dedication event planned, some press coverage, academic interest. It's actually going to be a fairly significant story in certain circles. Rare Book World can be surprisingly passionate about these things." "You should come to that event," Claire said suddenly. "All of us, as a family. I think it's important we actually see what you've built instead of just hearing about it secondhand at a dinner table." Mia's eyes widened slightly, clearly touched by the suggestion. "You'd want to come to something like that?" "Of course," Claire said. "I want to understand the person my future sister-in-law actually is, not the version everyone's been pretending to know for years." Their mother nodded eagerly, an unfamiliar brightness in her expression, something that looked almost like the beginning of genuine pride rather than performative concern. "I'd love to come," she said. "I want to see it, all of it." Even Marcus, after a long pause, nodded slowly. "Yeah," he said, his voice quieter than usual. "I think I need to see it too. I think I need to actually understand what you do before I open my mouth about it again." It was, Claire thought, as close to a genuine apology as Marcus was likely to offer in the moment, and watching Mia accept it with a small, tired nod told her that even a small gesture like that carried real weight after years of being dismissed. The conversation shifted slowly after that, softer, more careful, as the family began asking Mia real questions for what felt like the first time in years. How did she learn to authenticate manuscripts? What was the most surprising discovery she had ever made? Had she ever traveled somewhere unexpected chasing down a lead? Mia answered each question thoughtfully, visibly relaxing more with every exchange, as though years of built-up tension were finally beginning to ease. Daniel watched his sister come alive in a way he had never quite seen before, animated and confident, sharing details about her work with an enthusiasm she had clearly been suppressing for a very long time. He thought about how many family dinners had passed without anyone ever asking her a single genuine question about her life, and felt a fresh wave of guilt settle over him, though it was tempered now by something more hopeful, the sense that tonight marked a real turning point rather than simply another difficult evening to be endured and forgotten. "I have one more question," their father said eventually, his tone gentler than it had been all evening. "Why the bookstore? If you can afford so much more, why keep working there?" Mia considered the question carefully before answering. "Because it's where I feel most like myself," she said. "The acquisitions work is thrilling, but it's also isolating. Long hours alone doing research, traveling to meet dealers who trust discretion over friendliness. The bookstore keeps me connected to people, regular customers who come in every week, kids discovering their first favorite book. It reminds me why I fell in love with books in the first place, before any of it became about money or deals or provenance research. I never want to lose that part of my life, no matter how successful the other part becomes." "That's beautiful," Claire said softly and meant it completely. Their mother reached across the table again, taking Mia's hand in both of hers this time. "I am so sorry," she said, her voice thick with emotion. For every comment, every joke, every time I made you feel like you had to prove yourself to us. You didn't. You never did. I just wish I had understood that years ago instead of tonight." Mia squeezed her mother's hand, her own eyes bright now, the careful composure she had maintained all evening finally beginning to soften into something more vulnerable, more open. "Thank you for saying that," she whispered. "It means more than you know." The evening that had begun with careless cruelty had transformed, slowly and unexpectedly, into something none of them could have predicted, a family finally beginning to see one of its own clearly for the first time in years, humbled and grateful and quietly determined to do better going forward. As the evening wound toward its end, their mother began clearing the last of the glasses, insisting everyone remain seated while she worked, as though the small task gave her something useful to do with her hands while she processed everything she had just learned. Their father sat quietly beside Mia, asking small, careful questions about her work, listening in a way Claire suspected he had rarely listened to his daughter before. Marcus excused himself for a moment, stepping out onto the back porch, and Claire noticed Mia watching him go with an expression that was difficult to read, part weariness, part cautious hope. When he returned several minutes later, his eyes were slightly red, though he said nothing about it, simply took his seat again and reached for his sister's hand across the table. "I mean it," he said quietly. "I'm going to do better. I don't expect you to trust that right away, but I mean it." Mia nodded, accepting the gesture without demanding more than it could honestly offer. "I believe you're going to try," she said. "That's enough for tonight." As the family began gathering coats and saying their goodbyes, Daniel pulled his sister aside near the front door, away from the others. "I'm proud of you," he said simply. "I should have said that a long time ago about a lot of things, but I'm saying it now." "Thank you," Mia said, hugging him tightly. "And congratulations again, truly. I didn't mean to steal your night." "You didn't steal anything," Daniel said. "You just finally let us see the whole picture. That's not stealing, that's overdue." Claire hugged Mia goodbye as well, holding on a moment longer than necessary. "I meant what I said about the event," she murmured. "I want to be there. I want to actually understand this world you've built." "I'd love that," Mia said, smiling. And for the first time all evening, the smile reached her eyes completely, warm and unguarded. As Mia walked toward her car in the cool night air, her phone buzzed once more. She glanced at the screen, expecting perhaps a final confirmation message from her contact about the collection, but the name on the screen made her pause. It was a message from a rival dealer, someone she had crossed paths with before during smaller deals, someone whose reputation for cutting corners had always unsettled her. The message was brief, but its implication was clear enough to make her stomach tighten. There was a complication with the collection's provenance that had just come to light, something that could threaten the entire deal she had spent 8 months carefully building, unless she found a way to resolve it quickly. Mia stood beside her car for a long moment, staring at the screen, the warmth of the evening's reconciliation still settling in her chest, even as a new, unwelcome tension began to rise alongside it. Whatever peace she had found with her family tonight, it seemed the real test of everything she had built might still be waiting just ahead. She slid into the driver's seat, started the engine, and allowed herself only a few seconds of quiet uncertainty before her focus sharpened into something more familiar, calm, deliberate resolve. Whatever this new complication turned out to be, she intended to face it exactly the way she had built everything else in her life, quietly, carefully, and without needing anyone's permission to succeed. 2 weeks passed before Mia mentioned the complication to anyone, and by the time she did, the calm she had shown that night in the driveway had cost her more sleepless hours than she cared to admit. She sat across from Daniel and Claire at a small cafe near the bookstore, her laptop open on the table between them, a spreadsheet of documents and correspondence filling the screen. "The rival dealer who messaged me that night," she explained, "claims there's a gap in the provenance chain, a missing record from decades ago that could suggest part of the collection wasn't legally transferred to the family who's been selling it. If that's true, the university could be buying stolen property without even knowing it." "Is it true?" Claire asked, leaning forward. I don't know yet, Mia admitted. That's the problem. If I can't prove the chain of ownership is clean within the next 10 days, the university's legal team will pull out of the deal entirely, and 8 months of work disappears. Worse, if word spreads that I brought them a compromised collection, it could damage every relationship I've spent years building in this industry. Daniel frowned, setting down his coffee. Why would this dealer bring it up now, right after you closed the deal? That timing seems suspicious. Mia's expression sharpened slightly. It's not a coincidence. He's been trying to broker a deal with the same family for years and never succeeded. I think he's hoping if he can plant enough doubt to collapse my deal, he'll get a second chance to swoop in and negotiate his own terms once the university walks away. That's outrageous, Claire said. Can he even do that? In this world, reputation and doubt can do a lot of damage even without solid proof, Mia said. I need to move fast. I have a research contact who specializes in provenance history, and I've already reached out to the family's estate lawyer for the original transfer documents from decades ago. But some of these records only exist in physical archives, not digital ones. I may need to travel to verify them in person. Where? Daniel asked. There's a regional archive a few hours from here that holds estate records going back generations, Mia said. If the original documentation exists anywhere, it's there. I'm leaving tomorrow morning. I'm coming with you, Claire said immediately, surprising even herself with the speed of her offer. I don't know anything about provenance research, but I know how to dig through paperwork, and honestly, I want to see how you actually do this. Mia looked at her, clearly touched. You don't have to do that. I want to, Claire said firmly. Besides, Daniel's swamped with wedding logistics this week anyway. Let him handle the caterer disaster while we go save your deal. Daniel laughed despite the tension of the moment. Please go save the deal. The caterer disaster is genuinely a disaster. The next morning, Mia and Claire arrived at the regional archive just after it opened, greeted by a records administrator who seemed both delighted and slightly overwhelmed by their request to search through several decades of estate transactions. The building was quiet, all high shelves and soft light, and Mia moved through it with the practiced ease of someone who had spent countless hours in places just like it. They worked for hours, sorting through boxes of yellowed documents, ledgers, and correspondence, searching for any mention of the collection's transfer during the specific decade in question. Claire found herself unexpectedly absorbed in the process, fascinated by the small details Mia noticed that she herself would have overlooked entirely. A particular signature style, a watermark on certain paper, a reference to a family lawyer whose name appeared in other unrelated documents nearby. This is incredible, Claire admitted at one point, watching Mia carefully photograph a fragile ledger page. I had no idea this kind of detective work even existed. Most people don't, Mia said, smiling faintly, though her focus never wavered from the task. It's part of why I love it. Every document tells a story, if you're patient enough to read between the lines. By late afternoon, exhaustion had begun to set in, and Claire could see the strain building behind Mia's calm exterior, the quiet fear that they might not find what they needed in time. Then, just as the archive was preparing to close for the day, Mia found it, a faded transfer document buried inside a folder mislabeled decades earlier, clearly showing the collection's legal transfer to the family in question, signed and notarized, exactly as it should have been. This is it, Mia breathed, hands trembling slightly as she photographed every page with careful precision. This proves the chain is clean. This is everything I need. Claire let out a relieved laugh, hugging Mia tightly. You did it. You actually did it. We did it, Mia corrected, smiling for the first time all day. I couldn't have gotten through these boxes half as fast without you. That evening, Mia sent the documentation to the university's legal team along with a detailed explanation of her findings. And within 2 days, the deal was formally confirmed once more, the rival dealer's attempt to derail it dissolving into nothing against the weight of clear, verifiable proof. When Mia called Daniel to share the news, her voice carried a lightness he had rarely heard from her before. the sound of someone who had faced a real threat to everything she had built and come out the other side triumphant. "I'm so proud of you," Daniel said. "Both of you actually. Claire told me everything." "She was incredible," Mia said. "I mean that. I think she might have a future in this if the whole marrying my brother thing doesn't work out." Daniel laughed. "Don't give her ideas. I'm still recovering from the caterer situation." Mia's laughter, easy and genuine, filled the line, and Daniel felt a quiet warmth settle over him. The recognition that whatever distance had existed between his sister and the rest of the family for years was finally beginning to close, not through grand gestures, but through small, consistent moments of real support, the kind that had been missing from her life for far too long. That night, alone in her apartment, Mia allowed herself a rare moment of stillness, sitting by her window with a cup of tea, looking out at the quiet street below. The deal was secure. Her family had finally seen her clearly. And somewhere out there, a rival who had underestimated her had just learned exactly how far that underestimation could cost him. She thought about the years she had spent building this life in silence, absorbing dismissive comments at family dinners, while quietly becoming someone capable of things none of them had ever imagined. It had been lonely, at times unbearably so. But sitting there now, replaying the events of the past 2 weeks, she felt something she had not allowed herself to feel in a very long time, a full, unguarded sense of peace. The public dedication event for the collection was scheduled in exactly 3 weeks. For the first time in her life, her entire family had asked to be there, genuinely, eagerly, wanting to witness the full scope of what she had built. Mia smiled softly into the quiet apartment, already looking forward to it in a way she once would not have believed possible. What Mia had not mentioned to Daniel or Claire, at least not yet, was the brief, uncomfortable phone call she had received from the rival dealer himself 2 days after the documentation was confirmed. His name was Gareth Voss, a man she had encountered several times over the years at auctions and private showings, always polished, always charming in a way that felt calculated rather than genuine. "You got lucky," he had said, his voice smooth despite the obvious frustration underneath it. "Finding that document in time, most people wouldn't have known where to look." "It wasn't luck," Mia had replied evenly. "It was work, the kind of work that comes from actually caring about getting things right instead of trying to manufacture doubt to steal a deal out from under someone." Gareth had laughed, though it carried no real warmth. "You're good, Mia. Better than most people in this business give you credit for. But you should know, this industry has a long memory. People will remember how close you came to losing everything over a technicality you didn't even know existed. They'll also remember that I found the truth and proved it," Mia had said calmly. "That matters more than what almost happened. I'd focus less on what could have derailed me and more on why you thought manufacturing a crisis was an acceptable way to do business." The call had ended shortly after, but the exchange stayed with her, a quiet reminder that success in her field came with its own particular pressures, rivalries built on reputation and whispered doubt rather than open competition. She had not told her family about the call because she did not want to overshadow the genuine progress they had made together, the fragile, new openness that had begun the night of the dinner and grown steadily since. Instead, she poured her energy into preparing for the dedication event, coordinating with the university's archive team on the collection's public unveiling, reviewing press materials, and quietly fielding congratulations from colleagues across the industry who had heard about how close the deal had come to falling apart and how decisively she had saved it. Her reputation, rather than being damaged by Gareth's attempted interference, had only grown stronger, a fact that brought her a quiet, private satisfaction she allowed herself to enjoy fully for the first time in years. Daniel, meanwhile, found himself watching his sister with a new kind of attention over the following weeks, noticing details he had somehow missed for years, the careful, methodical way she approached problems, the quiet confidence beneath her calm exterior, the genuine respect with which colleagues and clients treated her whenever their paths crossed his own life. He mentioned this shift to Claire one evening as they addressed wedding invitations at their kitchen table. I keep thinking about all the years I just accepted the story Marcus and my parents told about Mia, he said. Quiet, unremarkable, struggling. I never once questioned it, even though I loved her. I just let it be true because it was easier than asking real questions. You're asking them now, Claire said gently. That matters. I hope so, Daniel said. I keep thinking about how lonely it must have been for her, building all of this in complete silence, surrounded by people who should have been paying attention and weren't. Claire reached across the table and squeezed his hand. The important thing is that you're paying attention now, and so is everyone else. I don't think Mia expects perfection from any of you. I think she just wants to feel seen, finally, after years of being overlooked. Their conversation was interrupted by a call from Mia herself, her voice bright with an excitement Daniel had rarely heard from her before. The university just confirmed the final details for the dedication event, she said. They want to include a small feature on how the collection was secured, provenance research included. They asked if I'd be willing to give a short talk about the process. Mia, that's incredible, Daniel said, genuine pride swelling in his chest. Of course you should do it. I'm terrified, Mia admitted, laughing nervously. I've spent years working quietly behind the scenes. I'm not used to being the center of attention like that. You'll be amazing, Claire called out, leaning toward the phone, and we'll all be there cheering you on. Even Marcus, probably looking deeply uncomfortable in a blazer that's too tight. Mia's laughter rang out clearly through the phone, warm and unguarded, and Daniel felt his chest tighten with quiet gratitude, grateful not only for his sister's success, but for the growing sense that this family, fractured for so long by careless assumptions and casual cruelty, might genuinely be finding its way back toward something whole. In the days that followed, preparations for the dedication event intensified. Mia worked long hours finalizing details with the university archive team, reviewing the exhibit layout that would showcase portions of the collection to the public for the first time, and drafting the short talk she had agreed, somewhat nervously, to deliver. She found herself rehearsing lines in her apartment late at night, pacing slowly between her bookshelves, trying to find the right balance between professional detail and the personal journey that had led her to this exact moment. Meanwhile, their mother had taken to calling Mia almost daily, asking small, genuine questions about the event, about her work, about her life in a way she never had before. At first, Mia found the sudden attention almost disorienting after years of quiet distance, but slowly, cautiously, she allowed herself to lean into it, answering questions honestly, sharing small details she once would have kept carefully guarded. I keep waiting for the old pattern to come back, Mia confided to Claire during one of their now regular coffee meetings. Some part of me expects the interest to fade, for things to slip back into how they always were. Maybe they will sometimes, Claire said honestly. Old habits don't disappear overnight, but I think what matters is that everyone's trying now, genuinely trying, and that's worth holding onto even if it's not perfect. Mia nodded slowly, turning her coffee cup between her hands. I want to believe that, she said quietly. I think, for the first time in a long time, I actually do. 3 weeks after the dinner that had changed everything, the day of the dedication event finally arrived, and with it, a new kind of nervous anticipation that settled over the entire family, each of them preparing, in their own way, to witness fully for the first time the extraordinary life Mia had spent years quietly building in the shadows of their assumptions. The university archive building stood tall and dignified beneath a clear autumn sky, its stone steps lined with a small but distinguished crowd of scholars, journalists, and invited guests gathering for the dedication ceremony. Mia stood near the entrance in a simple dark blue dress, clutching a folder of notes she had rehearsed so many times she could recite them in her sleep, though her stomach still fluttered with nerves she had not felt in years. Daniel arrived first, followed closely by Claire, both dressed for the occasion, both wearing expressions of unmistakable pride as they approached her. You look wonderful, Claire said, hugging her tightly. Are you ready? Ask me again in 20 minutes, Mia said, laughing nervously, though the warmth of their presence settled some of the tension in her shoulders. Their parents arrived shortly after, their mother dressed elegantly, clutching a small bouquet of flowers she had insisted on bringing despite Mia's protests that it wasn't that kind of event. Their father shook Mia's hand formally, then pulled her into an unexpected hug, murmuring how proud he was, his voice thick with an emotion he rarely allowed himself to show. Marcus arrived last, looking slightly uncomfortable in an unfamiliar blazer, exactly as Claire had jokingly predicted weeks earlier. He approached Mia hesitantly, clearly unsure how to bridge the awkwardness that still lingered faintly between them despite the progress of the past few weeks. "Hey," he said quietly, "I brought you something. It's probably stupid, but I wanted to." He handed her a small, carefully wrapped package. Inside was a first-edition copy of a book Mia had mentioned loving as a teenager, one she had spoken about wistfully years earlier, a detail Marcus had apparently remembered despite everything. "I called around to a few shops," he admitted, looking almost embarrassed. "Took longer to track down than I expected. I wanted to do something that actually meant something instead of just saying sorry again." Mia stared at the book, momentarily speechless, then looked up at her brother with eyes bright with unexpected emotion. "Marcus, this is—" she paused, swallowing hard. "Thank you, really." "I know a book isn't going to erase years of me being an idiot," Marcus said quietly, "but I wanted you to know I've been paying attention. To what actually matters to you, I mean, not just what I assumed mattered." The moment was interrupted gently by an archive coordinator, approaching to let Mia know the ceremony was about to begin, and the family took their seats together in the front row as guests filled in around them, quiet murmurs of anticipation filling the grand hall. The ceremony began with a brief address from the university's head archivist, explaining the significance of the collection and thanking the various parties who had made its preservation possible. When Mia's name was called to speak, she rose slowly, smoothing her dress, and made her way to the small podium at the front of the room, her family watching with unmistakable pride from the front row. She spoke for several minutes about the collection's history, about the painstaking research required to trace its provenance, about the near collapse of the deal weeks earlier and the archive discovery that had saved it. Her voice, shaky at first, steadied as she continued, finding a rhythm that felt increasingly natural the longer she spoke. She spoke, too, briefly and with quiet emotion, about her love of books, a love that had started in childhood and carried her through years of quiet, uncertain work before finally leading her to this moment. "I spent a long time being told, directly and indirectly, that this kind of work wasn't a real career," she said near the end of her remarks, her eyes briefly finding her family in the front row. "I'm standing here today because I decided that didn't matter. What mattered was doing work I believed in, carefully and honestly, regardless of whether anyone else understood it yet." The applause that followed was warm and sustained, and Mia stepped down from the podium with tears gathering at the corners of her eyes, quickly wiped away as her family surrounded her, each of them offering words of pride and admiration that felt, finally, completely genuine. It was during the reception that followed, as guests mingled near the exhibit displaying select pieces from the newly secured collection, that Gareth Voss appeared, unexpected and unwelcome, weaving through the crowd with the same polished confidence Mia remembered from their phone call weeks earlier. "Impressive turnout," he said, approaching Mia with a glass of wine in hand, his tone light but his eyes sharp. "Quite the achievement, especially considering how close it came to falling apart." Mia felt her family tense around her, sensing the shift in atmosphere immediately. "Gareth," she said evenly, "I didn't realize you were on the guest list." "I have friends in a lot of places," Gareth said smoothly. "I wanted to see the collection for myself. Congratulations, genuinely. You handled a difficult situation well." "Thank you," Mia said, though her guard remained firmly in place, unwilling to let his sudden politeness soften the memory of what he had attempted weeks earlier. Gareth's gaze drifted briefly toward Marcus and their father, standing protectively nearby, before returning to Mia with a faint, calculating smile. I imagine this must feel quite satisfying, he said, proving everyone wrong, family included from what I understand. The comment landed with a pointed sharpness that made Daniel step forward instinctively, though Mia raised a hand slightly, signaling that she could handle the moment herself. My family and I have worked through our own history, Mia said calmly. That's not really something that concerns you. What does concern you, I think, is that your attempt to manufacture doubt about this collection failed, and now you're here trying to find some other angle to feel better about that failure. Gareth's smile faltered slightly, the polished veneer cracking just enough to reveal genuine irritation underneath. You're sharper than people give you credit for, he said finally. People are starting to notice, Mia replied simply. That tends to happen when the work speaks for itself. He held her gaze a moment longer, then offered a short, tight nod and turned to disappear back into the crowd, leaving behind a lingering tension that slowly dissolved as the family closed ranks around Mia once more. Are you okay? Claire asked quietly once he was out of earshot. I'm more than okay, Mia said, and the smile that spread across her face was genuine, unshaken, the smile of someone who had faced a real threat and come through it not just intact, but stronger. Honestly, that might be the most satisfying part of today. Their mother, who had watched the entire exchange with quiet astonishment, reached out and squeezed Mia's hand. I don't think I've ever seen you like this, she said softly, so sure of yourself. I've always been like this, Mia said gently. It just took the right moment for everyone to actually see it. The reception continued for another hour, filled with introductions to colleagues Mia had worked alongside for years, people who greeted her with obvious respect and admiration, further reinforcing for her family just how significant her standing in this quiet, specialized world truly was. Daniel found himself repeatedly startled by strangers approaching to praise his sister's meticulous work, her reputation for honesty in an industry that did not always reward it, her rare skill for uncovering truths buried in decades-old paperwork. As the event wound down and guests began filtering out into the cool evening air, the family gathered on the museum steps, tired but glowing with a shared sense of pride that felt entirely new. Marcus draped an arm around Mia's shoulders, an easy, natural gesture that would have felt impossible just weeks earlier. I'm sorry it took me this long to actually see you, he said quietly, but I see you now, all of it, and I'm proud to call you my sister. Mia leaned into him, allowing herself, finally, to simply enjoy the moment without guarding against disappointment. Thank you, she whispered. That means everything. Above them, the last light of evening faded into a soft, deepening blue, and the family stood together on those stone steps, closer than they had been in years, finally united not by obligation or old habit, but by a genuine, hard-won understanding of exactly who Mia truly was. Later that night, once the family had said their goodbyes and scattered back to their separate homes, Mia sat alone in her apartment, the small wrapped book Marcus had given her resting on the table beside her tea. She turned it over gently in her hands, tracing the worn edges of its cover, remembering the exact age she had been when she first fallen in love with the story inside it, long before anyone in her family had learned to dismiss the quiet, persistent parts of her that loved things fully and without apology. Her phone buzzed once more, and for a brief moment her stomach tightened, half expecting another unsettling message from Gareth. Instead, it was a message from the university archivist, forwarding an early draft of a small feature article about the collection and the meticulous work that had gone into securing it. Mia's name appeared prominently throughout, described in terms she still found strange to read about herself: meticulous, trusted, exceptional. She read the article twice, slowly, allowing herself to feel the full weight of what she had built, not just the financial success or the professional respect, but the quiet, unshakable confidence that had carried her through years of being overlooked. For so long she had measured her worth against her family's expectations, telling herself it did not matter what they thought, even as some small part of her continued waiting, hoping, for the day they would finally understand. That day unexpectedly had come. She thought about the dinner weeks earlier, about the moment she had finally decided to stop protecting everyone else's comfort at the expense of her own truth, and felt a quiet gratitude settle over her, not just for how the evening had ended, but for the courage it had taken to begin it. Change, she realized, rarely arrived through grand declarations. More often, it arrived quietly, in a single decision to stop staying silent, and in the slow, patient work of allowing people the chance to finally see you clearly, one honest conversation at a time. Outside her window, the city had settled into its familiar evening hum, distant traffic and soft lamplight, ordinary and unremarkable in the way most true turning points in life tend to be. Mia finished her tea, set the small, worn book carefully on her shelf beside the others she treasured most, and allowed herself, at last, to simply feel proud, fully and without reservation, of everything she had built. The weeks following the dedication ceremony brought a steady, welcome rhythm of change to the family that none of them had quite expected. Marcus began calling Mia regularly, not out of obligation but out of genuine curiosity, asking about new projects, new discoveries, new challenges in her work. Their conversations, once stiff and infrequent, grew easy and comfortable, filled with the kind of casual warmth that should have existed between them for years. Their mother took to visiting the bookstore on quiet weekday afternoons, sitting in the reading corner near the window while Mia worked, content simply to be near her daughter, to witness firsthand the small, ordinary moments of the life she had once dismissed so carelessly. She began asking Mia's opinion on books, allowing herself to be recommended things she never would have considered before, slowly rebuilding a connection that had frayed thin over years of misunderstanding. Their father, in his own quieter way, began forwarding Mia articles about rare manuscripts and historical archives whenever he came across them, small gestures that carried more weight than either of them fully acknowledged out loud. It was not a dramatic transformation, not the kind that made for a tidy, single moment of resolution, but a slow, steady accumulation of small efforts, each one chipping away at years of distance. Daniel and Claire's wedding planning continued alongside these quiet changes, and Mia found herself more involved than she ever expected to be, offering opinions on venues, helping Claire track down a rare, out-of-print poetry collection to read during the ceremony, spending long evenings with her soon-to-be sister-in-law discussing everything from flower arrangements to the strange, winding path that had led Mia to her unlikely career. "I still can't get over it," Claire admitted one evening, the two of them sitting cross-legged on Mia's apartment floor surrounded by wedding invitation samples. "A few months ago, I barely knew you. Now I feel like I understand you better than half the people I've known my whole life." "I feel the same way," Mia said, smiling. "I think sometimes the people who really see you aren't the ones who have known you the longest. They're the ones who actually pay attention." Claire reached over and squeezed her hand. "For what it's worth, I'm really glad you're going to be my sister." "Me too," Mia said softly, meaning it completely. Marcus's genuine effort to rebuild their relationship reached its clearest expression a few weeks later, when he showed up unannounced at the bookstore on a slow Tuesday afternoon, looking uncharacteristically nervous as he approached the counter where Mia was cataloging a fresh shipment of donated books. "I have a business question," he said, clearing his throat. "Actually, it's not really a business question. I just wanted an excuse to come see you at work. I've never actually seen you here before. Isn't that strange? All these years and I never once visited." Mia set down the book in her hands, studying her brother with quiet surprise. "You came just to see the store." "I came because I wanted to understand this part of your life," Marcus admitted. "The part you said reminds you why you love books in the first place. I wanted to see it for myself instead of just hearing about it." Mia gave him a small tour, introducing him to the regular customers who greeted her warmly by name, showing him the reading corner their mother had claimed as her own, the shelf of rare finds she kept carefully behind the counter, the small back office where she sometimes worked late into the evening on her acquisitions research. Marcus listened intently to every detail, asking real questions, genuinely curious in a way that surprised them both. "This is a good life you've built," he said finally, looking around the quiet, book-lined store with something like wonder. "I mean that. I used to think success only looked one particular way. I don't think that anymore." "What changed your mind?" Mia asked, curious. "Watching you," Marcus said simply. "Watching you build something extraordinary without ever needing anyone's permission to do it. That takes more courage than I ever gave you credit for." The moment settled between them, quiet and sincere, and Mia felt something in her chest ease further. Another small piece of old hurt finally beginning to heal. As autumn deepened into the early chill of winter, the family found new rhythms together. Dinners that no longer carried the same undercurrent of tension. Conversations that flowed easily instead of circling old, tired assumptions. Mia's career continued to flourish. New clients seeking her out specifically for the reputation she had built through the university deal. Her name slowly becoming known and respected among a small but influential circle of collectors and institutions. She began, cautiously, to open up further about her personal life as well, mentioning to Claire one evening that she had recently started spending time with a fellow archivist she had met during the provenance research for the collection. A quiet, thoughtful man named Julian who shared her love of old books and patient, careful work. It was new, still uncertain, but for the first time in years, Mia allowed herself to imagine a future that included not just professional success, but genuine companionship as well. "I'm happy for you," Claire said warmly when Mia mentioned it. "Truly, you deserve every good thing coming your way." "I'm starting to believe that," Mia admitted, smiling. "It's taken a long time to get here, but I think I finally do." As the family gathered once more for a quiet Sunday dinner, months removed from the dinner that had changed everything, the atmosphere around the table felt entirely different, warm and easy, filled with genuine laughter instead of careful deflection. Marcus told stories about his visit to the bookstore. Their mother asked Mia detailed questions about her latest project. Their father listened proudly, occasionally adding a thoughtful comment of his own. Mia sat at the table, surrounded by a family that had finally, truly learned to see her, and felt a deep, settled contentment she had once believed might never be possible. The quiet strength that had carried her through years of being overlooked had not disappeared now that she was finally being seen. If anything, it had only grown steadier, a permanent, unshakable part of who she was, regardless of whether anyone else was paying attention. The morning of Daniel and Claire's wedding arrived crisp and bright, the kind of clear autumn day that seemed almost too perfect to be real. Mia stood in the small dressing room beside Claire, carefully fastening the delicate clasp of her sister-in-law's necklace, her hands steady despite the fluttering excitement in her chest. "Nervous?" Mia asked, catching Claire's eye in the mirror. "Terrified," Claire admitted, laughing, "in the best possible way." "That sounds about right," Mia said, smiling. "For what it's worth, I don't think I've ever seen my brother happier than he's been these past few months. You're good for him." "He's good for me too," Claire said softly. "And so are you, Mia. Honestly, I feel like I gained more than just a husband this year. I gained a sister who actually talks to me like a real person." Mia felt her throat tighten slightly with emotion, touched by the sincerity in Claire's voice. "That goes both ways," she said. "I don't think I realized how much I needed someone like you until you showed up and refused to let this family keep pretending everything was fine." Their conversation was interrupted by a soft knock at the door, and their mother entered, dressed elegantly for the occasion, her eyes already glistening with emotion. "You both look beautiful," she said, her voice thick. "Mia, could I borrow you for just a moment before the ceremony starts?" Mia followed her mother into the hallway, curious, and found her father waiting there as well, along with Marcus, all three of them wearing expressions that suggested something planned, something deliberate. "We wanted to give you this before the ceremony," their mother said, holding out a small, neatly wrapped box. "It's not much, but we wanted you to have it today, surrounded by family, instead of waiting for some other occasion." Mia opened the box carefully and found inside a delicate silver bracelet, engraved with a small, simple inscription that read, "Seen and celebrated always." She stared at it for a long moment, blinking back sudden tears. "We should have given you something like this years ago," their father said quietly. "Not a bracelet necessarily, but the sentiment. We should have made sure you always knew how much we valued you exactly as you are." "Thank you," Mia whispered, pulling each of them into a tight embrace, one by one. "This means more to me than you know." Marcus, the last to hug her, held on a moment longer than the others. "I know we've said a lot of this already," he murmured, "but I wanted today to be another reminder. I see you, Mia, completely. And I'm endlessly proud to be your brother." The ceremony itself unfolded beautifully, Daniel and Claire exchanging vows beneath a canopy of golden autumn leaves, surrounded by family and friends who had gathered to witness the beginning of their new life together. Mia sat in the front row beside Julian, who had accompanied her as her guest, his quiet presence a steady comfort throughout the emotional day. She watched her brother's face as Claire walked down the aisle toward him, watched the pure, unguarded joy there, and felt her own heart swell with happiness for both of them. During the reception that followed, held in a warmly lit hall strung with soft golden lights, Mia found herself pulled onto the dance floor by her father for the traditional parent dance that had somehow, without her quite realizing it, become part of the evening's plans as well. A small gesture meant to honor not just Daniel's wedding, but the family's broader healing. "I don't think I ever told you," her father said quietly as they swayed slowly to the music, "how much I regretted not asking you more questions over the years. I told myself I was being practical, encouraging you toward stability. But really, I think I was just afraid to find out I might be wrong about what stability actually looked like for you." "You know now," Mia said gently. "That's what matters." "I do know now," he agreed, "and I intend to keep learning for as long as you'll let me." Later in the evening, as the reception wound into its final hours, Marcus rose for a toast, tapping his glass gently to draw the room's attention. He looked nervous, more nervous than Mia had ever seen him, clutching a small card of notes in his hand. "I want to say something about my sister," he began, glancing toward Mia with a small, warm smile. "For a long time I didn't really see her, not the way I should have. I made jokes I shouldn't have made. I believed a version of her that was never actually true. But this year she taught me something important. She taught me that quiet doesn't mean small, and that the people we underestimate most are often the ones capable of the most extraordinary things." He paused, raising his glass higher. "Mia, I'm sorry it took me so long, but I see you now completely, and I'm endlessly proud of everything you've built and everything you continue to become. To my sister." The room raised their glasses in unison, a warm chorus of agreement rippling through the hall, and Mia felt tears slide freely down her cheeks, no longer bothering to hide them, surrounded finally by a family that had learned, fully and completely, to see her. As the evening drew to its close, Mia stepped outside for a quiet moment alone, standing beneath the clear night sky, stars scattered brightly overhead. Julian joined her a few minutes later, wrapping his coat gently around her shoulders against the evening chill. "Good day?" he asked softly. "The best kind," Mia said, leaning into him. "The kind where everything finally makes sense." She thought back to that first dinner months earlier, to the careless jokes and dismissive comments, to the quiet strength she had drawn on to sit through it all without breaking. She thought about the courage it had taken to finally speak her truth, and the slow, patient work of rebuilding trust that had followed. None of it had been easy. But standing here now, surrounded by a family that had truly learned to see her, a career that continued to flourish beyond anything she once imagined possible, and a quiet, growing love with someone who understood and valued exactly who she was, Mia felt, for the first time in longer than she could remember, completely and unshakably whole. Inside, the music continued to play, laughter and warmth spilling out through the open doors, and Mia smiled softly, ready to return to the celebration, carrying with her the hard-won, unshakable knowledge that being underestimated had never once been a reflection of her own worth. It had only ever been a mistake other people made, and one, finally, they had all learned to correct. A year passed, and the small bookstore where Mia had spent so many quiet mornings underwent a modest change of its own. The elderly owner, ready at last to retire, approached Mia one afternoon with an offer she had never expected, the chance to buy the store outright and take over its future entirely. Mia accepted almost without hesitation, using a portion of her acquisition's earnings to secure the purchase, determined to preserve the small, familiar space that had shaped so much of who she was, while quietly expanding it to include a modest section dedicated to rare and antique volumes, a natural bridge between the two halves of her working life she had once kept so carefully separate. The reopening of the store, renamed simply with Mia's own initials etched discreetly above the door, drew a warm crowd of familiar faces and new admirers alike. Her mother arrived early that morning, insisting on helping arrange the front window display, chatting easily with customers as though she had always been part of the store's daily rhythm. Her father brought a small brass plaque, engraved with a quiet dedication to Mia's persistence and vision, and insisted on hanging it himself near the entrance, beaming with unmistakable pride as he stepped back to admire his work. Marcus, true to the steady change that had taken root in him since the wedding, had become something of a regular fixture at the store as well, often stopping by after work with coffee in hand, content simply to sit in the reading corner and talk with his sister about nothing in particular, savoring the ordinary companionship they had both been missing for so many years. He had even begun recommending the store to his colleagues, proudly mentioning his sister's growing reputation in both the local literary community and the wider world of rare manuscript acquisitions, a complete reversal from the dismissive jokes that had once defined their relationship. Mia's professional life, meanwhile, continued to flourish in ways that still occasionally caught her by surprise. The university project had opened doors she had not anticipated, invitations to consult on other significant acquisitions, requests from smaller museums seeking her expertise in provenance research, even an offer to guest lecture at a nearby college on the intersection of literary history and careful archival work. She accepted the lecture invitation nervously, remembering the trembling uncertainty of her first public talk at the dedication ceremony, though this time she found herself settling into the role with far greater confidence, drawing on the quiet strength she had spent years building in silence, now finally given room to be seen and celebrated. Her relationship with Julian deepened steadily over that year as well, built on the same patient, careful foundation that defined so much of her life's work. Long conversations over shared meals, quiet weekend trips to small regional archives neither of them could resist exploring together. A comfortable, easy partnership built on mutual respect rather than grand, sweeping gestures. When he proposed to her one quiet evening among the towering shelves of her own newly acquired bookstore, surrounded by the very stories that had shaped her entire life, Mia said yes without a single moment of hesitation, feeling, for the first time, that her future held exactly the balance of stability and quiet adventure she had always hoped for but never quite believed she deserved. Daniel and Claire, settling into their own first year of marriage, remained constant, steady presences throughout it all, regular visitors to the store, enthusiastic supporters of every new milestone Mia achieved. Claire, in particular, had grown genuinely fascinated by the world of rare book acquisitions, occasionally joining Mia on smaller research trips, teasing that she might eventually consider a career change herself if the wedding planning industry ever lost its charm. "You created a monster," Daniel joked one evening, watching his wife and sister huddled over a stack of auction catalogs at the kitchen table, deep in animated discussion about an upcoming estate sale neither of them wanted to miss. "I simply showed her what real excitement looks like," Mia replied, grinning, and the easy warmth between them, so different from the careful distance that had once defined their relationship, filled Daniel with a quiet, enduring gratitude he never took for granted. Looking back, none of them could pinpoint the exact moment the family had truly changed. It had not been a single dramatic turning point, despite how much that first fateful dinner had set everything into motion. Instead, it had been the slow, steady accumulation of small choices, repeated apologies made real through consistent action, curious questions finally asked and genuinely listened to, quiet efforts sustained over months rather than abandoned after the initial rush of guilt faded. Mia often thought about those years of careless dinner table jokes, the quiet ache of being consistently overlooked by the very people who were supposed to know her best. She no longer carried bitterness about it, not really. If anything, she had come to understand that the experience, painful as it had also forged in her a resilience and independence she might not have developed any other way. She had learned to build a life entirely on her own terms, without needing anyone's permission or approval, and that lesson, hard one as it was, had become one of the greatest strengths she carried into everything she did afterward. On quiet evenings at the store, long after customers had gone home, and the shelves stood silent and still around her, Mia sometimes found herself thinking about all the young women who might walk through her doors one day, quiet and underestimated in their own families, dismissed for dreams that did not fit neatly into anyone else's expectations. She made a point of remembering their names, of asking real questions, of listening carefully to what they loved and encouraging them toward it, however unconventional it might seem to everyone else in their lives. It became, over time, a quiet mission of her own, separate from the acquisitions work that had brought her financial success, separate even from the family healing that had defined the past year so profoundly. She wanted to be, for others, the kind of person she had once desperately needed but rarely found, someone willing to look past easy assumptions and actually see the whole, complicated, capable person standing in front of them. 2 years after that first fateful dinner, the family gathered once more around a table, this time to celebrate Mia's own engagement to Julian, the same dining room, the same familiar faces, though the atmosphere could not have felt more different from the tense, careless evening that had once unfolded there. Laughter came easily now, genuine and warm, stories shared freely, questions asked with real curiosity rather than careless dismissal. At one point during the evening, Marcus rose again, glass in hand, an echo of his wedding toast months earlier, though this time his words came easily, without nervous hesitation. "To Mia," he said simply, "who taught this entire family what it actually means to truly see someone, we're lucky to have you, all of us." The table raised their glasses together, and Mia looked around at the faces gathered there, her parents, her brother, Daniel and Claire, and Julian beside her, steady and warm, and felt a deep, settled gratitude for how far they had all come. The quiet girl who had once absorbed careless jokes without complaint, who had built an extraordinary life in complete silence because speaking up felt too exhausting to bother with, had finally found her voice, and in doing so, had helped an entire family find their way back to each other. It had not been easy, and it had not happened overnight. But sitting there now, surrounded by people who had finally, truly learned to see her, Mia understood completely that every quiet year of struggle had led, patiently and purposefully, to exactly this moment, and she would not have traded a single part of that long, difficult journey for anything else in the world.